You're listening to the Quint's podcast.
Press freedom in Jammu and Kashmir is at stake again after the government cancelled allotment of the premises to the Kashmir Press Club, the largest membership organisation in the valley, on 17 January. In a dramatic sequence of events starting 15 January this year, a group of Kashmiri journalists who were disgruntled over the delay of press club elections arrived at the Kashmir Press Club and quote-unquote took over the club and declared itself as a quote-unquote interim body. Armed personnel of the J&K Police were posted both inside the club premises and outside the gate. In a statement, the faction alleged that the management committee of the club was delaying press club elections for unknown reasons, adding that the committee had placed the media fraternity in a quote-unquote unwanted trouble. What caused further alarm was that soon after the press club was taken over, it was locked by the group, citing the COVID-19 weekend lockdown as the reason. And then on 17 January, in a series of tweets, the J&K administration said that the club, which was registered as a society in the erstwhile state, has quote-unquote ceased to exist after it failed to re-register. Under the Societies Registration Act, the administration stated that the building out of which the club was being run is being taken away, thus erasing the press club from existence. Media organizations across the country condemned the takeover, with the Editors Guild of India calling it a quote-unquote armed coup and the Press Club of India terming it as quote-unquote illegal. But why was the club taken over so dramatically? Were elections delayed for quote-unquote unknown reasons as the faction claims? And what does the sudden closure of the Kashmir Press Club mean for press freedom in the valley? For today's episode, we speak to Srinagar-based journalist Aqib Javeed, who was also an elected member of the ousted body. You'll also hear from senior Kashmir journalists such as Shahana Butt, Fawad Shah, Riaz Masroor and Guha Jilani. You're tuned in to The Big Story, the podcast where we dissect the headline-making news for you, and I'm your host, Himmat. The Kashmir Press Club resided in the heart of Srinagar. The building was allocated by the Mufti government in 2018 after the press club was registered as a society. And over the years, the club remained open during all historical developments, from the reading down of Article 370 to the outbreak of COVID-19. For any journalist in Kashmir, the club was a safe haven and a place away from the tense security atmosphere on the streets, says Aqib Javeed, a journalist based in Srinagar. According to him, the club was a symbol of hope for many freelance young journalists who came there not only to write their stories, but also to learn from each other.
KPC was hope for hundreds of journalists, including me. We would approach KPC and its members whenever we face harassment or intimidation from the state. And not only that, we would meet a number of senior journalists where we would discuss story ideas and debate, things there. It was just like a second home for us. Since these freelance journalists, they do not have any offices. So KPC was safe, safe place for them where they would come and file their stories. Mm-hmm. And they would also discuss story ideas with other journalists as well. When everything was shut, post abrogation of Article 370, and there was no internet connection, all the journalists would assemble at the KPC and would, file their stories, and they will write their stories. They will discuss the stories, and then they will go to the government facilitation, media facilitation center, and just file the stories and come back to the KPC. Mm-hmm. So it was the place where, since the situation was very, hostile for journalists and people as well, so it was a safe place where they would come and write their story and do their work.
Speaking to the Quint, senior journalist Riaz Masroor said that the closure of any democratic institution is condemnable.
The closure of any democratic institution is condemnable, reprehensible, and it is the intrusion into the private spaces of media fraternity. It is like locking up a parliament or an assembly. It is not an ordinary thing, because media is the fourth pillar of democracy. So it is the moral and ethical responsibility of the powers that be that they should uphold the democratic credentials and principles and come forward and deploy their officers and open the gates. Whoever has done it, because police has everything with them. There are CCTV cameras installed there. Police and administration knows who has locked up the premises. They can fix the responsibility and open the gates so that these stranded journalists can at least have some space where they can work.
And all of this came to a stop over the weekend when a group of 11 scribes entered the club, led by journalist Salim Pandit of the Times of India, flanked by armed police personnel. In a statement to the media, Pandit explained that the tenure of the ousted committee ended 6 months ago in July 2021. He claimed that for 6 months the club was quote-unquote headless and that quote-unquote it put the media fraternity in unwanted trouble. Aqib Javid, however, points out that it is important for our listeners to know that Mr. Pandit was suspended from the press club in 2019 after he wrote an article in the Times of India alleging that club members are quote-unquote jihadi journalists. Mr. Javid notes that other journalists accompanying Mr. Pandit were not even club members. He adds that this group usually writes against the club and their action may also stem from their loss in the press club elections in 2019.
All the journalists are on same page and they anonymously condemned the action that was done by Mr. Pandit.
Mm-hmm.
However, few journalists who were accompanying Mr. Pandit, they have lost the elections in 2019, and they have been already writing stuff against KPC, and and we believe that this was done just because they lost the elections previously, and that's why they helped the state to bulldoze and destroy this institution.
Speaking to the Quint, senior journalist Gohar Jilani, who was also an elected executive member of the club, termed the quote-unquote takeover by the group as quote-unquote daylight robbery. He claimed that the press club staff was also harassed.
तो एक बिल्कुल जो है गैर महज़िब तरीके से, अनसिविलाइज्ड तरीके से, एक रेनेगेड स्टाइल में आर्म्ड फोर्सेस के साथ कुछ चंद एक जो सस्पेंडेड मेंबर्स भी हैं वो आए और उन्होंने इस पे जबरदस्ती कब्जा किया डे लाइट में। जिस दिन एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन ने कोविड लॉकडाउन वीकेंड लॉकडाउन किया था, उसी दिन डे लाइट रॉबरी की तरह वो आए और हमारे ऑफिस स्टाफ को भी हरास किया और यहाँ पे अब ताला भी लगाया। और जो सारे जर्नलिस्ट बेचारे जो काम कर रहे थे 2 साल 3 साल से यहाँ, जिनके लिए लाउंज बने थे, जो अपना वर्क स्टेशन यहाँ से यूज कर रहे थे, अपनी स्टोरीज फाइल कर रहे थे, उनको परेशानी में मुब्तला कर दिया। तो ये सिर्फ एग्जाम्पल हमें 96 में मिली थी, 95 में जब एक रेनिगेड दौर था, उस तरह की रेनिगेड स्टाइल में ही ये चीजें हुई हैं। लेकिन जो सारे जर्नलिस्ट जो बॉडीज हैं यहाँ, 10 जो टॉप की जर्नलिस्ट बॉडीज है, एडिटर्स गिल्ड ऑफ इंडिया, प्रेस काउंसिल ऑफ इंडिया और इसी तरह से जो बाकी मुंबई यूनियन ऑफ जर्नलिस्ट, दिल्ली यूनियन ऑफ जर्नलिस्ट, उन सब ने हम सब की जो है जो प्रीवियस बॉडी है और जो पुराने जो इसमें लोग हैं जो असली जर्नलिस्ट हैं उनकी हिमायत की है, उनका सपोर्ट किया है और हम वापस अपना इंस्टीट्यूशनल कैप्चर होने नहीं देंगे। कोई भी जर्नलिस्ट वो नहीं चाहेगा।
But for a moment here, let's weigh in on Mr. Pandit's claim about the club being quote-unquote headless and ask why the elections have not been held yet. It all points to the delay in the registration process of the society, according to Mr. Javid. According to him, the tenure of the elected body ended in July 2021. However, due to the registration process of the club under the Society Registration Act of 1860, the elections couldn't be held on time. After 6 months, the authorities issued the re-registration certificate on 29 December 2021, and the date of fresh elections was also announced on 13 January 2022. Mr. Javid adds that there was no miscommunication with the club members. Mr. Javid adds that there was no miscommunication with club members as to why elections were not being held and that regular updates were being sent to every member.
See, the tenure of the elected body ended in July 2021. However, due to the registration process of the club under the Society Registration Act 1860, the elections could not be held on the time because the government took at least 6 months to to clear the process. And when they issued the registration certificate, we immediately issued a notification regarding the elections that were supposed to be held on 15th of February 2022. But suddenly an order came from the district administration saying that our registration certificate had been kept in absence. So on the very next day, this group came and they forcefully took over the charges, and they in fact the KPC in its statement has said that they threatened the staff who was present there. So yes, that's why the process was. In fact, all the journalist associations, journalist bodies know that the elections were delayed because of the registration process, and we used to update them regularly that this has happened, and they understood it.
So there were no contentions based on why the elections are not being held on time or they're being delayed for other reasons or such.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We could not hold the election since we were not registered. Our registration got cancelled since abrogation of Article 370. All the societies became null and void. So we have to register our society again. We have to register our organization again before the registered societies. So that's why election was delayed.
Mr. Pandit, in his statement, also claimed that, quote, various journalist organizations across Kashmir unanimously decided to form an interim body of 3 members, end quote. He did not, however, provide names of these organizations. The 9 journalist bodies in Kashmir too opposed the takeover, including the Journalist Federation of Kashmir, the Kashmir Working Journalists Association, and the Kashmir National Television Journalists Association. Condemnation also came in from the Editors Guild of India, the Press Club of India, and the Mumbai Press Club. And after this very public takeover, things took a turn for the worse, with the allotment of the premises of the club being taken back by the Jammu and Kashmir administration. In a series of tweets on 17 January, the administration stated that, quote, the government is concerned over the emergent situation which has arisen due to the unpleasant turn of events involving 2 rival warring groups using the banner of the Kashmir Press Club, end quote. The statement went on to say that the government, quote-unquote, is committed to a free and fair press and believes that journalists are entitled to all facilities, including a place for professional, educational, social, cultural, recreational, and welfare activities, end quote. Journalists in Kashmir, however, are taking the administration's statement with a pinch of salt, with some even alleging that this may have been the plan all along. Fahad Shah, the editor-in-chief of the Kashmir Wala magazine, says that the takeover of the club and the cancellation of allotment does not come as a surprise given the state of press freedom in the valley.
Well, I think the cancellation of the allotment of the space to the press club by the government was the next step, followed by what happened just a few days ago about taking over of the press club. That is basically perhaps the government just wanted the press club to be shut, because press club was mostly a space for independent journalists, freelancers, and mostly young journalists who would come there and they would engage with other senior journalists there, and it was kind of a community. And perhaps the government did not like that, and they didn't want this space to be there. So the first step that was done was cancelling the allotment, because the process had already started among other associations, that a committee was formed and there were processes being taken up that the elections will be held, a new body would have been created. But now, without the building, without the space, there is no press club legally as well as physically, so it doesn't exist anymore. So takeover of the press club doesn't come out of the blue, because the situation for journalism and the press in Kashmir has been very detrimental in the last 2 years. Especially there have been a lot of issues that the journalists have been facing. Now there was this one space where journalists would gather, and this space was very useful during the August 2019 clampdown, because everyone would be there. So this independent institution, which had an elected body and was supposed to be going for the next elections, was taken over by a group of journalists forcibly, while other journalists and other journalist associations were not taken on board that what is going to happen. If they were concerned about the elections, they should have informed. There could have been a meeting that would have been held among all the associations, and something could have been figured. But this way, taking away a space and forcibly informing that we are going to run this space, and there was a presence of police and other forces also there, as we have seen in the photographs and the videos. It is very condemnable and it is very sad and unfortunate. But this doesn't come as a surprise, because the situation for journalism in Kashmir is anyway very bad, and it happens at that point of time. This doesn't come as a shock to people, especially to journalists who are reporting from Kashmir.
Shahana Bhatt, a broadcast journalist based in Kashmir, adds that the entire move seems to be orchestrated and that it is clear that the government does not want a space where journalists can meet, exchange ideas, and work.
I think the takeover of the press club was completely funny, because when the news surfaced, I was like laughing, because since the inception of the idea of having a press club, there has not been any rival groups or subgroups. It is just the journalists, and the idea was to have a professional space where people would come and work under one roof, be it local, national, or international journalists. And all of a sudden, somebody is saying that there is a rival group who has taken the charge of the press club. So it appeared to be really funny. But now, since what happened today, after the authorities took over the entire charge of the press club building and the premises, it seems that the entire thing was orchestrated. Whatever has happened today is self-explanatory, that government does not want to have that space for journalists where they would work independently and they'd have that space to work together. But I think what is really unprofessional and unethical is that what they've done, there was no need to do it in such a way where you're creating a rift between a fraternity. It would have been better if they would have sent a professional letter to the Press Club committee asking them to hasten the process of re-registration or close down operations if re-registration fails. Closing down doors, locking the premises, and handing over the premises and building to the estates department is self-explanatory that government does not want to have a free space for journalists to work. But besides that, one thing is also clear, that if government says that this is not the intention and this is completely not their plan, that'll be clear because the journalist bodies are going to re-register or going to reinitiate the process of re-registration of Press Club. If the authorities really make things easy for the journalist fraternity, it'll be really clear that it was not orchestrated. The entire plan was not orchestrated. So now it depends, and everything would get clear. But as of now, to all of us, it seems that they do not want journalists to have a separate space to work.
So, what happens next? Will there be an election soon? According to Mr. Javid, the committee members are trying to ensure that the club is legally registered first, and only then will an election take place.
No, honestly speaking, we haven't decided yet what to do. We are just, checking out or seeing the situation of what to do. But honestly, yet we haven't decided anything. But we are looking forward to see what can be done, and we are also at the same time trying to understand that we will not take anything, any step that annoys the government. But we want to do it legally. We want to take the legal route through which we can restore the Kashmir Press Club.
Mr. Javid also wrote an article for the Quint detailing the events which took place on 15th and 17th January. A link to that article will be in our show notes. To stay up to date with the stories, subscribe to the Big Story podcast and follow the Quint on our social media handles. If you liked listening to this episode, please subscribe to the Big Story for episodic updates. We're available on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, JioSaavn, and most of the other popular podcast streaming platforms. For other podcasts, please log on to the Quint website, and for any feedback, please shoot an email to podcast@thequint.com.
Thanks for listening. Log on to the Quint's website and check out our other podcasts.